Hello everyone, in this demo we are going to learn how to carve your wax ring, the precision wax ring. I'm going to follow the handout step by step, and because it is a long demo I'm not going to show you the first step, which is the carving of the initial block that we start with to make the ring. So please look at the demo for the wax cube that you did for the practical exercise. It will be the same process. So we start with a rectangular block, 30 by 25 by 17 millimeters. Safety, very important. Don't forget to wear eye protection and the dust mask. Some of the tools that you are going to need, other than the usual suspects, the precision tools, you are going to need several wax burrs, cylinder and ball or round burrs, and your vulcrylic files, and also a sliding gauge, which we'll see later. So let's go to step 2. And we need to use our dividers and to set them at 12.5. We are going to draw these two lines across each side of the block. So I'm marking on the in the center of the longer side of the rectangle, 12.5. So it's right in the middle, and repeat this on at the other end of the rectangle. And make sure everything is exact. It is very critical. Now we make that same 12.5 millimeter line that goes across the first one. So this one is not in the middle of the side because it is a rectangle. It's always good to double check your measurements. You can use your calipers for that. Again, it's 12.5 for this one. Now we need to join the marks that we've made, and we use the set square and the fine tip scriber for that. So this is one. Centered right in the middle. And now I'm checking again the measurement for the other line that goes across. Again, 12.5. And with the set square, we're going to join the marks. So one nice line with the fine tip scriber. Only one line. Okay, so we've done one side, and you would repeat that to do the other side, same way. Now, steps 3 and 4. We are going to need our dividers, and this time we set the dividers at 8.5 millimeters, and this would make a 17 millimeter diameter circles. And this will be the finger hole of the ring. And of course, this circle needs to be done in the same way on the other side of the block. So here is the circle. Make sure it is perfectly centered, so put one leg of the dividers right at the intersection of the two lines. We need two circles, so the second circle will be a little bigger. For that, we open the dividers at 10 millimeters. So that's what it looks like. And this will be the thickness of the shank of our ring at the bottom of the shank. And you would make these two circles in the same way on the other side. Our next step is step 5. And in step 5, we are going to remove the wax inside the smaller circle, the inner circle, and this hole will be the finger hole of the ring. As always, we go up to the line, but we are not removing that line. So make sure you keep that, the line of the inner circle. We are going to use a large wax cylinder burr. And you see that when I start, I put the burr on an angle, so not straight down, but on an angle, just to avoid making a mess, sliding or whatever. Once you've made a little indentation in the wax, then you can straighten the burr and drill in a vertical position. That's what it looks like at this point. Not very deep yet. So I'm not going to go right to the line, to the inner circle, just to be safe, because these wax burrs are they can be very fast and very aggressive. So I'm giving myself a little bit of a safety zone, about 1.5 millimeter, and I will refine that later once the hole has been done completely. So let's slow down the video, and at this point the hole, well, there's no hole, but the indentation is getting very deep. I'm using the light to see what color the wax is, and you saw that it was a very light pink, meaning of course that it is quite thin. So we're getting very close. Oh, that's it, I went through. So now we have a hole. Also, I did not mention that you need to work on one side, then rotate the wax, work on the other side, and so on. So don't try to drill the hole from one side only. Go back and forth. Okay, so more work with the wax burr. It's a little cleaner now. The next step to make it even nicer and cleaner is the vulcrylic file. You need to check the diameter of the hole. It should be 17 millimeters diameter when it's done. So of course with the vulcrylic file you have more control, and you always make sure you are not going over the line, the inner line, the smaller circle. So keep checking the diameter. and it should be getting close to the 17 mm now. Another tool that's quite useful is a scraper, and with this you can make the inside of the ring quite smooth. Now be careful, use it very lightly. You don't want to shave too much wax at one time. So we are now at step 6, and you see on the diagram the shaded area. We're going to remove this off the top. That's 2.5 millimeters. So we set the dividers at 2.5 millimeters to, or the calipers, to mark that measurement, 2.5 millimeters. And we are going to file it, not saw it. And then we join the marks with the set square. So we trace a line at 2.5 from the top on all 4 sides of the wax block. And you can double check that measurement as usual, 2.5. Now we're not going to saw this little chunk, it's just too small, so we're going to use either the vulcrylic file or the 3-in-1. Brace yourself on the bench pin, and you notice that I put my fingers between the wax block and the bench pin because wax being very delicate, we have to be careful. It can get dented very easily. Remember to go up to your line without removing it. So I still have a little bit to go, and now I measure this distance from the top of the block to the hole, the finger hole. It should be 6.5 millimeters from the top to the finger hole. We are now at step 7, and we're going to trace the shape of our stone. It's an 8x10 cabochon oval. So we are going to trace two sets of lines exactly in the middle of the top of the block. So first we're going to trace lines at 3.5 millimeters. Double check again with the calipers. Use your dividers to mark the 3.5 measurement on each side, and you can trace that line. And double check that again, 3.5. Now we have to trace the other set of lines, and these will be at 8.5 millimeters from the sides of the block. So 8.5 on each side. You can mark this line with your dividers. And 8.5 again. Use your set square to join these marks and to make sure everything is centered and perpendicular. This has to be very precise because this is where the stone is going to go, where the seat of the stone is going to be made later. So that rectangle in the center is 8 by 10. The next step is going to be tracing the exact shape of our stone, the oval, 8 by 10 oval. There are different ways of doing it. I like to use a template. I find it a little easier. An 8 by 10 plastic template. You see that it fits my stone. I also like to add a few other marks. I mark the center of each side of that rectangle so that I can really place the template exactly where it needs to be, and then trace with the striper. The stone fits right there. Our next step will be to make a seat. In this step, this is step 8, we're going to make a seat for our stone. So you see the shaded area here on the diagram. We're going to remove the wax there using a small wax cylinder burr, 4 to 6 millimeter in diameter. It needs to be a small burr because it is quite precise. As before, to avoid sliding or making a mess, start by making a small indentation with the burr, hold it at an angle, and once you have that, then you can bring it back up vertically and continue digging out the wax. And of course, make sure you do not remove the oval shape that we traced earlier. And stop and check that your stone fits, and I'm talking about the depth now. You know that for bezels, the depth of the bezel has to be equal to about 1/3 of the height of the stone. Now this stone is not very symmetrical, as you can see. It's also quite tall. It has a high shoulder. So in this situation, I would go a little deeper, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the height of the stone. We've done that. It fits. And you also should make sure that the bottom is really flat, so that the stone later on doesn't rock. It has to be sitting flat, level. Now we are ready for step 9. It is actually more like 2 steps, so we've divided it in A and B. We are going to trace some lines on top and on the sides of the block, and this will help us scribe the shape of the ring. So the first lines that we are going to make are at 5 millimeters from the sides. Start tracing these lines on the top of the ring. So one on each side at 5 millimeters from the edge. Whether you use your dividers or the calipers, this is what it looks like. Now we need to trace lines on each side of the block, and that line goes from the top and joins to the middle of the shank of the circle. So from the top, where we trace the 5mm line, and then it joins the middle of the shank of the two circles. And we trace the same line on the other side here. So from the middle of the circles, on the outside of the circles, to that 5mm line that we traced on top. And now we have the rough shape of our ring, and you would repeat the same on the other side. Now we're still in step 9, but the second part of it, 9B. We're going to reduce the block, remove wax on the side, all around the base of the shank, and then along these diagonals that we just scribed, and on the top, and then on the other side in the same way. So this is really a reductive or subtractive process. That's what wax carving is. We start with a block and then we remove the wax until we arrive to the shape that we want. We are going to make sure we leave 2mm at the base of the shank. So right here, we'll have to make sure that we do not go over the outer circle. I'm going to cut the corners with the saw first. It will be a little faster. And as we did for the cube, I'm making a slight groove first to help me saw straight. But I'm not getting too close to the outer circle, just to be safe. Here's one corner, and now the other corner, and that's the base of the shank. Okay, so very rough, of course, we haven't filed yet. For the top and for the side, we are going to use the vulcrylic file or the 3-in-1 if you prefer. But we cannot saw here because there is too little room. So we are skipping the saw and going to the file. Try to file one side a little bit, then rotate the block, go to the other side, just to keep the shape as symmetrical as you can. So you just go back and forth. This takes a little while. There is a lot of wax to remove. On the top, you'll have to make sure you do not go beyond the 5mm line that we scribed earlier. We are a little closer here to the shape that we want, but there is still some wax to remove, so let's go back to filing. And always brace yourself against the bench pin, but protect the wax, protect your piece with your hand, your fingers. Still refining the shape, getting closer to the lines. And this is what we end up with. I am measuring the base of the shank. It should be 2 millimeters. You see that I went up to the line, which is the outer circle. And that's the final result. Make sure it is symmetrical, even, and smooth. We are now at step 10. For this step, we are going to scribe 3 lines. The first one in the center, in the middle of the outside of the ring. So the width being 17 millimeters, we are going to set our dividers at 8.5 to trace that center line. And it goes all around the ring. You can use your calipers as well, or both calipers and dividers. This will be the middle of the shank. You can make a light line with your calipers first and then go over with the dividers. Now the second set of lines will be at 6 millimeters from the edge, from the outside edge of the ring. So one line on each side of that center line that we just did. Again, we go all around the ring and we end up with 3 lines going around the side and the bottom of the ring. And now step 11, we are going to taper the shank from the upper edge of the hole to the bottom, and then we are going to file a curve in it. So we are tapering the bottom of the ring from here to the bottom. There's not going to be a line here, so we'll have to try to keep things symmetrical. We are going to remove each side and end up with a width of 5 millimeters. Use the vulcrylic file on the flat side of it and remove wax on each side. So there is quite a bit to remove there. Go from side to side to keep the angle even and symmetrical. We're not touching the top of the ring at this point. And make sure you do not go beyond that line which marks the width of the shank. The bottom of the shank should end up being 5 millimeters wide. Always check that both sides are symmetrical. That's what it should look like. Now, the second part of this step, after tapering, we need to file a slight curve in the shank. This time, use the round side of your vulcrylic file. And again, work from side to side to keep the shape symmetrical. And we're still not touching the top of the shank. So this is that curve, and this is how you would hold the file. Just a slight curve on each side. Now that we have our basic shape, we're going to round the top of the ring from bezel edge to finger hole edge. That's step 12. That means from here, from the bezel edge to the top of the finger hole. So that's it here. The bulky sharp corners will go as well. We're going to file these off. And what we want is a nice round shape like this. This is the finished ring in metal. You see it's very smooth and rounded and less top heavy than our wax ring now. With the vulcrylic file, you file the corners. Keep rotating the ring, so instead of doing one corner and then another one, just file a little bit of each one and keep rotating. It will be more even this way. There's a lot of filing to do. It's still very square. It needs to be much rounder than this. You see that I put my thumb inside the bezel, and that guides the file and also protects the edge of the bezel. I don't want to go too close to the edge. The shape is rounder now, and there is still a lot to remove, though. You see around the bezel it is still too thick. This is what we want at the top of the bezel. I would leave about 1 millimeter of thickness there. It shouldn't be any thinner. This would cause issues later when casting. The next step is to round everything else. All these sharp edges and flat spots have to be filed as well. This should not be flat, it should be rounded. If we look at the metal ring again, you see that there's a line going from edge to edge, and the top is very round and smooth. So going back to filing with the vulcrylic file, and going around the top. And then working on the shank and filing off these very sharp edges. It is still bumpy, but we now have a curve going from edge to edge. The top is less bulky, but we still have some flat spots there on the sides, so these will have to be rounded. Again, no flat spots. So back to filing again. And keep your thumb inside the bezel to protect the edge. Remember, it has to stay at 1 millimeter of thickness. Let's see what it looks like now. It has to be perfectly symmetrical, so you need to check regularly. Still a little flat on the sides there. Now I'm going to refine all of this and blend all the shapes again, smooth out the surface, and I'm using a flat file from the hardware store, nothing fancy, but it is fairly fine, and I think it works very well for this detailed filing, for smoothing out surfaces. Let's have a look. It is much smoother now. There are a few little bumps still, and this is the final step for smoothing out everything. I rub the wax ring on a very coarse cotton towel, and it makes it really nice and shiny. We are now at step 13, the last step. We are going to hollow out the inside of the top of the ring with wax ball burrs, and we'll need our sliding gauge to check the thickness of the walls, which is very crucial for this process. Before we do that, we need to, with the ball burr, we need to open up the seat. This is what the metal, the cast ring looks like. And you see inside what the hollowed out area looks like. Before we open up the seat, we need to trace an oval shape on the top of the seat, leaving out a small ledge all around. This is where the stone is going to actually sit. This ledge should be about 2 millimeters, 2 to 3. So draw that precisely, and with the ball burr, open up the top. And make sure you do not go over that line you just traced. That's done. That's what it looks like inside. This is what we need to do now to prepare for hollowing out the top. We need to draw that shape that you see here And you see how the ends taper, and also how on each side I have left a ledge. So we are not going to hollow out right to the edge. We leave about 2-3 millimeters here on each side. That's for comfort. And then it tapers out on each side. Let's see how much this weighs at this point. 1.7 grams. So this is what you should have before you hollow out. 1.7, 1.8 grams. Hollowing out takes a long time. I'm speeding up here, but do it slowly and carefully. Make sure you stay within the lines that you have scribed. And also make sure you are doing this very consistently and evenly. We don't want to have thin spots and thick spots. That would be problematic for casting. There will be a texture, and that's fine as long as it's nice and even. So I'm not finished yet here. You see I haven't gone up to my lines yet. Keep measuring with the sliding gauge. I am still at 3 millimeters here. So we want to get to about between 1 and 1.5 millimeters of thickness. Look through in front of the light, and that shows you where the thin and thick spots are. The lighter the wax, the thinner it is. That's a good way to check. So long process, as I said, plan for this. It always takes longer than you think. I'm speeding up again here. And again, checking against the light, always very helpful. This is what we have. Another check here. And the weight that I have is 1.4 grams. That would be okay. The stone fits. So we are ready for the next steps. And thank you for watching.